Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. All right, so let's we could talk a lot more about this, but we have spoken quite a bit. Let's move on to Google's spam policy changes. They just issued these, I believe, yesterday or the day before yesterday. There's been a lot of discussion of them online. There's a number of changes, which I'm not going to go through. You can look at a number of articles that compare the before and after. But one of the changes they made was a change in language in the introductory paragraph, and I want to read it, and then not the whole entire paragraph, but the first sentence. Read it, and then we can talk about it. So the document
we can scoff at it.
The document is entitled "Spam Policies for Google Web Search." We'll put it in the show notes. The first sentence reads: "In the context of Google Search, spam is web content that's designed to deceive users or manipulate our search systems in order to rank highly." And, no problem with deceive web users, but there are two things that I think are highly problematic with that sentence. And I don't have the original sentence to compare it to, unfortunately, right now. So the two problems are the use of the word designed, and also the term manipulate. So, or manipulate our search systems. And the problem with the word designed is that it may be previously used in the sentence that this is allegedly a replacement of, but designed is about subjective intent. What is the intent behind the behavior that they're punishing? So that's highly problematic because, dealing with an industry at scale, intent implies a case-by-case analysis, which is not going to be meaningful. But the more problematic term is manipulate our search systems, because arguably you could argue that the entirety of the purpose of SEO is to manipulate Google search systems. I mean, David, obviously you have a different position, and I don't necessarily take the position that that's what SEO is, but it could be argued that any attempt to influence Google search systems is manipulation and therefore prohibited by this new language. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll start with the manipulate front. I mean, I think, I would define SEO as sort of designing and creating content and promoting content in a way that is likely to receive favorable treatment from Google. I think the word manipulate is a bit of a stretch, given that Google has tens of thousands of super smart engineers who are hopefully talented enough to ward off threats from largely single person shops, who are actively trying to spam Google. So that's kind of my first take, is just that I don't share your sort of doom and gloom over the entire SEO industry as being a bunch of manipulators.
I'm not accusing people of that. I'm saying that's a potential interpretation. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
The second thing I'd say is, Google's been peddling fear, uncertainty, and doubt since the early days of Matt Cutz's tenure, and this was 2005 or 6 probably. So to me, this is just one of a series of these sort of very onerous, threatening announcements, and I don't. Google is going to penalize who they want to penalize. They're going to ignore the actors that they want to ignore or choose to ignore, don't have the resources to deal with. And I wouldn't read anything additional into this particular policy versus anything they've published for the last 15 years. So
ignore it.
Well,
I wouldn't say ignore it.
The question is, are you doing something that's useful for users, and is it or are you doing something that explicitly attempts to manipulate Google? And if you are, then you need to assess the risk. If you're not, then ignore it and do what's good for users, right? I think it's
I wouldn't say ignore it. I think it's important to be aware of what Google's guidelines are around link schemes and parasite SEO and all these things. Like, I think it's totally, like, you would be doing a disservice to you as a SEO professional and to your clients who are hiring you if you weren't aware of what these policies were. But I think with all of these policies, it's important to just, as Mike said, like just assess the risk and make the appropriate decision for either the client's business or your own business based on that risk. And I think that's certainly how I've always viewed SEO. Now, I'm definitely like a almost 100% white hat SEO, just because I don't think in most cases that the risk is worth it, but other people may come to a different conclusion. And I think that's how they should approach all of these documents. Any statement from any Google representative or any policy document, that's my recommendation for how to approach those.
And a good example of this is in local with name spam. Google has an explicit rule against name spam, but they clearly don't enforce.
But they don't enforce it.
Well, they don't enforce it up to some number of words. We don't know what that number is, but you see so much of it, and it often we've seen cases in New York City with sex harassment lawyers where one lawyer keeps adding sex harassment lawyer to his name. Google keeps taking it off repeatedly, but they keep adding it back and they keep ranking, and they get the one box in sex harassment in New York City. So they don't enforce it, or at least they don't enforce it any more than telling the owner that we changed it and the owner changes it back, whatever the SEO agency.
Well, right. And I don't think that's, this is a very complex area. Like sex harassment law is complex in and of itself. But to me, like there's nothing inherently deceitful towards users of appending that keyword to your business name. So I think that behavior is one where if that business has taken the risk assessment and decides like, yes, it is worth it to us to get another 25 cases a year for 4 years until Google finally shuts this down, like that to me is a very reasonable decision to come to, assessment to come to. So,
but they've also got two other modifiers, so they have this long addendum to their name, but it's working for them. You're right, and the question is, if you're in that market,
and again, I wouldn't advise that. I would advise a sexual harassment firm in New York to build a brand and do all the things that Google does generally recommend. I think that's a better long-term strategy, but other people may come to a different conclusion. And I don't think that this document, Greg, in particular, should be one that sort of changes that calculation. So,
business keyword stuffing in the business name is a widely recommended practice. I mean, I see people talking about it all the time and recommending it, and it is clearly designed to manipulate search results. And as you say, Mike, Google's enforcement is uneven, and this is
it's not uneven, it's inadequate.
All right, well, or non-existent or something, or barely existent. But in a different context, right? You try to create laws that are clear, especially with where the police are concerned. There's been a lot of case history where if you create an ambiguous law that gives too much discretion to a police officer, that's often struck for being vague or overbroad or whatever. And all I'm saying is that Google is just introducing ambiguity into this.
Laws are designed. But laws are designed for the benefit of society, and Google's policies are designed for the benefit of Google. I think that's a very important distinction to make.
Well, that's not right. I mean, that's not what they sort of rhetorically present, but you're absolutely right.
That is exactly what these policies are designed for. So, and that Mike and I feel so strongly that they should be regulated is because many of their inactions have such a profound.
Well, that's exactly right.
On society. So
that's exactly right. When all these legal cases about SERP organization were sort of coming up a number of years ago, and the courts were saying, "Well, this is Google can do whatever it wants with the SERP. This is First Amendment stuff. This is an editorial decision, and they can do whatever the heck they want." It was sort of Google was in a little bit of a different position. Now, effectively, they are like the whole public utility argument kind of comes to mind. They are really like a public utility at this point because they have so much power and they hold the power of life and death over many of these businesses, especially small businesses. And so, that implies regulation.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.